Hello and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm Laurie Bull and here with Representative Warren Kampf today, and we're discussing the state budget. Governor Corbett recently sat down and presented his plan to the legislature, and in addition to his plan, there's some large issues that will be affecting this year's budget. So we're here to talk about it today. Representative Kampf, welcome.
Hello.
First off, just to lay the groundwork, can you give viewers just a brief idea of the process of the state budget and how that works going forward?
Sure. So I was just reelected, and so I'm now in my second term. The term is 2 years long, and it's called a session. In each session, each year, the governor gives a budget proposal, address, speech to the General Assembly, the Senate and the House, and that occurred yesterday. He also, when doing that, provides us with a detailed budget proposal. We're still, going over that in fine print, but he gave some of the bigger concepts of it in his address to the General Assembly yesterday. We will probably see a budget bill in the House or in the Senate later in the spring. What happens after he makes his address is the appropriations committees of both the House and the Senate, so two separate committees, they convene a series of hearings, day in and day out for about 3 weeks. And they bring in the cabinet secretaries from each of the departments and the other non-cabinet departments that are involved in the budget. They hear a presentation from each of those representatives. They get a chance to ask questions. Members like myself, I'm not on the Appropriations Committee, are essentially permitted to submit questions. And then after that process, both chambers kind of go and begin to decide what they're going to do, and a budget bill is generally introduced. That's only the beginning of the process that I've just described. Last 2 years we've done this. We finished our budget on time, which was new compared to the prior 5 or 6 years. On time is at the end of June. You have to do it by the end of June. I'm pretty confident we're going to do that again for a third year. I'm certainly hopeful we'll do that. That's the law. And probably sometime in May or June that will be completed.
So I guess the message is to people that may have heard the proposal from the governor is it's just a starting point.
I think that's right. I mean, I think in the two budgets I've been involved in so far in the State House, the budget we ended up with was substantially different from the one that starts out with the governor's proposal. Some things were, very much the same. Spending levels were about the same, I think, especially in the first year and the second year. There was a little bit of a difference in spending levels from the beginning to the end of the process, but no tax increases on time. And so there will be similarities, but it won't be the same product.
Well, you mentioned being on time. That's important, and in Washington, I believe the Senate hasn't passed a budget for 3 years, and yet we must here in Pennsylvania, and not only that, it must be balanced, unlike at the federal level. Can you talk about the challenges that presents?
Right. Well, I think the bottom line is Pennsylvania, like every other state, we balance our budgets, meaning the revenues that are coming in match expenditures, and a couple of years ago, that wasn't happening. And so a mid-year adjustment even occurred in administrative costs, and a freeze was put into place in order to make those budget projections by the end of the year. We certainly don't have a printing press for dollars here in the Commonwealth. I'm not sure. In fact, I don't think it would be a good idea to have one. I don't think it's a good idea to fund operating out of debt. So it's important, really important, I think, to the taxpayer to have a balanced budget and a budget process every year. I don't quite understand why they don't do that in Washington, but I'm not down there. I go to the Capitol on behalf of the people of the 157th.
Speaking of Governor Corbett's budget that he did just introduce, just some general themes as far as spending goes. What were his priorities, and what did you get from his address?
I do think, again, the budget itself, there is no tax increase in it. He did talk about, with respect to transportation funding, possibly lifting a cap on the oil company franchise tax, which we can talk about in a little while if you'd like. The spending level, I think, goes up about 2.5% over last year's budget. And his projections, I presume, although we haven't dug into that, his projections for revenues for the coming year will bear that out. This year, the projections that we used seem to be spot on. We're actually, I think, projected to end with a surplus, maybe even about $250 million. So the projections that we used last year seem to be pretty good. Hopefully we're going to use the same basic principles for that.
And in light of that, and the budgets, excuse me, have been austere, in the past couple of years because of the economy. How do you feel this starting proposal might be good for taxpayers?
Well, you mentioned the prior two budgets, and it never hurts to describe them. When I came into office, as did the governor 2.5 years ago, 2 years ago, there was about a $4 billion budget shortfall. That was in part because of the economy, but mainly because stimulus dollars from the federal government, about $3 billion a year, had been used to fund the hole in the budget created by the economy. And that money was all spent. So either tax increases to the tune of $3 or $4 billion would have to have been put into place, or you had to tighten your belt. And that's what the majority of the members in the House and the Senate did, along with the governor. So there were no tax increases, but as you said, those were tight budgets. It appears that revenue from economic activity in the state is, generally on an upward trend. I always hesitate to say that because one never knows, but as I just said, the revenue for this year is going along as projected. So I think the governor's overall proposal is probably going to be sensible in terms of revenues coming in to match his proposed expenditures. There are some other pieces to it that I'm sure we'll talk about. I mentioned transportation. It's not really a part of the operating budget of the state, but certainly it's part of what government does in Pennsylvania. He's also talked quite a bit in the media, but also in the budget address on doing some fundamental public pension reform, because that's a big driver of our increased costs of operating the state government and also the school district budgets. And then liquor store privatization is another priority of the governor's, which is in part connected to this budget.
We'll get to those bigger issues in a moment, but you had mentioned that revenues are coming in a little higher than projections at this point. But certainly the best way to work ourselves out of what is a slow, stagnant economy is getting people back to work. You have a proposal called Innovate PA that takes a unique approach to that with one particular industry. Can you talk about that?
Well, where I am from, along the 202 corridor and the 422 corridor, there are a number of life sciences, pharma, and bio companies of all different sizes. Some that started there are homegrown, and others that have located in that area because we have a lot of people, my constituents, who are from that industry, have grown up in it, have good careers there, and a lot of expertise. It's actually known around the world as a good location for companies that are in that industry. So I have a piece of legislation we're about to introduce again. I did it last session along with a colleague of mine. And essentially what it does is it injects some dollars into the kind of the life sciences, high-tech space for these startups. We have a long history in Pennsylvania through something called the Ben Franklin Technology Partners and through the life science greenhouses of supporting with tobacco settlement money and other resources some of the startup companies in the high-tech and the life science space. And that, I believe, is important in an economy like this. That industry that I just described, life sciences, has been going through some difficulties for lots of reasons, not just the economy. And make sure that we continue to make a good investment in that area and in those startup companies, I think is important. The way we inject those dollars in is by conducting an auction. Insurance companies could bid on future tax credits because they have to pay taxes in Pennsylvania, and those dollars would then come into a fund and then be spent through a detailed vetting process, because we've had that in place for a long time, by the startup companies. That's basically the idea.
And you mentioned your area, that it is a growing industry and an established industry as well, but also in Western Pennsylvania. And certainly it's important that as we're training our young folks in our great universities, that we have jobs for them to come to and stay in Pennsylvania. So I think this certainly speaks to that as well.
I think that's right. The payroll for the life sciences industry, the direct payroll, I think is $8 billion a year in our state. So it's a big piece of our economy. It's of course connected to health care, which is another big piece of Pennsylvania's economy. And we have a robust higher education system, both public and private, in Pennsylvania. And we want to make sure those graduates have good jobs when they come out. We did talk a little bit about employers and this budget and what things are in it that are good for employers. For the last 2 years, I think myself and others have been working on trying to make Pennsylvania more job friendly. The part of that has been reducing the double tax on many of our small businesses, the stock and franchise tax, some lawsuit reform. This double tax, the stock and franchise tax, we phased it down, but we haven't phased it out. The plan is to phase it out this year. The governor mentioned that yesterday morning in his budget address, and also talked about the corporate net profits tax in Pennsylvania, which happens to be the highest in the country, effectively at about 10%. It's something that the chambers of commerce have long said is a red flag to businesses that start here or businesses that are thinking about locating in Pennsylvania or in the Northeast. They say, boy, that corporate tax is the highest in the country. Why would we go there? Especially since there are others around us that aren't quite so high. So he's recommending that we again take a run at reducing that sum. I applaud those concepts, because I do think Pennsylvania needs to be more job friendly, more business friendly.
Well, before we move on to some of these bigger issues that we had mentioned earlier, let's take a break. Legislative report. We'll be back in just a moment.
Did you know that Violet Oakley was the first female artist to receive a large commission for artwork done in a United States Capitol building? In 1902, Joseph Houston, designer and architect for the 3rd Harrisburg Capitol building, commissioned Violet Oakley to paint murals for the governor's reception room. He believed that Oakley's contribution would add interest to the building and act as an encouragement of women of the state. Prior to beginning her work for the Capitol, Oakley set out to England to conduct research for her murals. Upon return, she decided to center her artwork on William Penn and the founding of Pennsylvania. Oakley made sure that Penn's ideals of justice and peace could be seen throughout her work. In 1906, she completed 13 murals titled The Founding of the State of Liberty Spiritual and was placed in sequential order around the governor's reception room. These murals were some of the first to be installed in the Capitol. When Edwin Austin Abbey, another artist for the Capitol, died in 1911, Oakley was offered another opportunity to create murals for the unfinished Senate and Supreme Court chambers. Her work on the Senate murals, including International Understanding, was completed by 1919. Oakley then completed the Supreme Court murals, including the Divine Law, by 1927. Oakley is said to be the principal artist for the Capitol, with a total of 43 murals on display. She remains one of the greatest muralists in the United States. Now you know.
Welcome back to the program. We've been discussing the state budget with State Representative Warren Kampf. And in addition to the budget, I guess in the framework of the budget, are some larger issues that are facing Pennsylvania right now. One of them being funding for transportation. We have an aging infrastructure. We have some of the oldest highways in the nation, and also bridges that are deficient and need to be fixed. But those things don't come cheaply. They are very expensive to do. Where are we with transportation funding, and where is the governor, I guess, on that as well?
Well, the governor's proposal is, essentially based on the idea that transit, rail and the road system have been sufficient or substantially underfunded for a long time. And when I say underfunded, there have been some studies done for the state over the last 10 years, and they put that underfunding annually at something like $3, $4, even $5 billion a year underfunded. Now, we spend about $6 billion a year on PennDOT and that sort of thing, the rail and the road network and the bridges. So it's a lot of money. Before you start talking about an additional $3 or $4 billion a year. However, Pennsylvania has probably as many roads as any state in the country that are state roads. We're an old state. A lot of these roads, although they're in local communities, are maintained. A lot of these bridges are maintained or rebuilt or built anew by PennDOT. So I don't think there's any question that more revenue could be put to good use. In my local community, the Paoli Transportation Center is something that's been talked about for many years and is in the pretty significant planning stages. The 422 roadway, there's a bridge there that's under capacity, and 422 is a headache in many commuters and residents' lives every day. So certainly resources are needed to solve some of these long-term problems that we've deferred, and the governor's proposal is, I think, in large measure to lift this cap on the oil company franchise tax. There was a cap long ago put in on that tax, and the transportation community indicates that that cap is not suited for today's transportation needs. He did also propose a reduction of the flat gas tax in Pennsylvania, which I think the Pennsylvania portion of it is 12 cents. He proposed taking it down to 10 cents. But he's looking for, over, I think, a 5-year period, raising about $5 billion in new revenue. So that's fundamentally his proposal.
Last year, a bill was passed that would allow for what's called a public-private partnership. How do you see that maybe being a part of the solution here?
Well, I have to say, Lori, I voted against that one. And the reason I did is because I believed it allowed an unelected board in Harrisburg of 7 people, I think the number is, to decide to toll an existing road. and I've opposed the tolling of 422. I think it's like a kind of a main street for people, and to put a toll on it is something I've opposed from the outset. The P3's legislation did pass. It is the law. I have heard people talk about how it could be used in many different ways for allowing the private sector to participate with the public sector in transportation management, transportation funding. So there are probably countless ways that that could happen. I think we just have to be careful that the end user, my constituents, aren't ending up holding that bag in a way that really hurts them in the pocketbook.
Let's move on to something that you've had a keen interest and had some legislation regarding, and that's pension issues. Both the state employees and school employees' pension funds are underfunded at this point. There's an unfunded liability for those, and this is a problem that affects local municipality budgets, local government budgets, school district budgets, as well as here at the state level. Can you talk about that and the plans for that?
Right. Well, the big problem is that our public pensions are massively underfunded. One estimate is $45 billion for the two of them, the state workers and the school district employees. I guess that's about, say, 65% funded. And we're taking in less than we're paying out on an annual basis, so that fund is being depleted, going down. The bottom line is it's having a huge impact on our state and school district budgets. The piece that we have to put in terms of raw dollars every year is going up by giant amounts, and it's having an impact on all other things. At the state level, every other line item in the budget, everything that is important to any one person is being affected by these giant increases. And the same is true at the school district level. Now, that's not the employee's fault. The employees pay in, I think the state workers pay in something like 6.5% of their salary every year, and I think the school district employees pay up to 7.25%, 7.5%. I fundamentally believe it's that very, very good benefits were granted back in 2001 to all of those employees and made retroactive. So if you were just about to retire in 2001, you got something like a 25% annual increase in your future benefit. And then the government did not fund those benefits for a very long period of time. We've started to put in much, much more money into those funds, but it's still not enough. So that's basically the problem, and maybe we can talk a minute about what the options are.
Well, I guess there's short-term options and there's long-term options. I guess long-term there's changes that can be made to the plans. Anything being looked at for the short term?
Well, I would say everything is being looked at. These liabilities exist for benefits that have already been earned, even if somebody is still working. We're not going to be able to get around that. There are discussions about future benefits earned for existing employees potentially being affected, and the governor seems to be headed down that road based on his comments yesterday. So
basically protecting what they've earned to this point under the current rules, but maybe changing the rules going forward for anything else they may earn.
Right. That was part of his proposal, although he was very quick to say, and I should say this, for current retirees, people who are receiving a benefit, no one that I've talked to is talking about changing those benefits in any way. And then there's also talk about affecting future employees, people who aren't hired yet, as a way to essentially say to the taxpayer, you in your life in the private sector have, say, a 401k or a deferred compensation plan. We're going to make benefits for future government workers the same or similar to your own. And the reason for that fundamentally is I think that Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, has not proven itself capable of properly managing these funds. I don't think it is the stock market and the down economy that has caused this. I think it's mismanagement here in the state capitol, and we've got to do something to take government, I think, out of that equation. We'll see how that comes out. We do need some short-term relief, I think, because we're having real difficulties budgeting, but I'm confident we'll get something done that's meaningful. You know, I've certainly been told that this is, you know, this is a priority of both the Senate and the House and the governor's office, and I'm confident something will occur.
Well, we just have a couple minutes left here, so let's get to that third big issue that's out there, and it's one that Majority Leader Mike Turzai also put forth, and that's the idea of privatizing the state stores. First of all, your thoughts on that, and then Governor Corbett has an idea of what to do with the money gained from the licenses that would be sold. Your thoughts where that money should go?
I mean, my thoughts on the liquor stores is it honestly doesn't make sense to me that we are in the state business of selling wine and spirits. It's a holdover from Prohibition in the 1930s. Well, after Prohibition in the 1930s. And I do believe that we should move out of that business. I think it's important to, whatever we do, make sure we have a consumer-friendly outcome. I think we do have to recognize that, you know, we have human beings, people who are in these positions in the state store system, and also beer distributors. Many of them have, you know, this is what they do. They rely on that, and to expand, you know, beer and wine into other venues besides where they are. They have beer. That's going to have an impact on them, a negative impact. So I think we have to have a good plan. I think the governor is moving in the right direction. I'm on the liquor committee this session, just put on that. So I'm going to be watching that closely and hopefully moving us towards something which is consumer friendly and sensible. The governor linked that to education funding in the sense that auctioning off the licenses for a private sector company to sell wine and spirits, that those dollars would be made available, and other dollars from the privatization plan would be made available for essentially non-operating kind of one-time grants into public education, K through 12 education. You know, I'm certainly intrigued by that. I want our public education system to remain strong. It is strong in my community. But I'm also interested in whether the amount of money that is projected will actually be there if we do indeed privatize the liquor store system.
Well, there's a lot on the plates of you and your colleagues as the budget comes forward, and we'll be keeping folks apprised. I imagine you, through newsletters and other things, will be keeping your constituents apprised of what's going on. So thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thanks, Lori.
Sure. And that's all the time we do have today. If you have any questions or concerns for State Representative Warren Kampf, please contact him at his local office or through his website. That information will be shown in just a moment. Thanks for watching.